Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2022 Chevy Silverado 2500, we're going to be showing you how to install the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs for the rear axle. But before we do that, why don't we check them out, kind of run through a couple of tests and see if these are a suspension enhancement that's going to work out for you. Before we actually put our suspension enhancement on, what we like to do is just run through a couple of tests, before and after. That way we can really kind of compare and get a good feel for how these airbags affect the performance of our truck. So we'll get to that in a moment, but right now we're just going to take a couple of measurements and kind of give us a baseline to go from as far as our ride height is concerned. So truck's factory suspension, no weight in the bed of the truck. I will take my tape here and measure from the ground to this edge here, and that's going to be right at 42 inches. Moving up here to the front, take that same measurement, the ground to the edge. Looks like we're setting right at about 40.5 inches. So what we'll do now is get some weight, put it in the bed of the truck, and see what happens. So went ahead, got some weight in the bed of our truck. This was about 180 gallons of water. It's just a big solid block of ice now, so quite a bit of weight actually. And we'll take these measurements again. And right away, I can tell the truck's definitely squatting back. This weight made a difference, so we'll see exactly. Here at the back, from the ground to that edge, that's gonna be right at 39.5 inches. Here at the front, from the ground to that edge, see if I can get better measurement on it here. That's going to be right at 41 inches. So what happened was, the back squatting down, which in turn is lifting up the front end a little bit, and pretty heavy duty truck, although this is a decent amount of weight, it's not that much in terms of how much this thing can actually handle. So if that's causing the back end to squat down and the front to lift up a little bit, there's some room for improvement there. But what's going to happen with that is it's going to affect all kinds of things. Your tread wear on your tires, your braking and your steering performance, just your overall ride. You're kind of putting unneeded wear and tear and stress on your suspension components, that could be helped out a little bit. And, chances are pretty good if you're checking this out, you felt, how a truck feels when it has a lot of weight on it. It's not always that great, but measurements are one thing. How it's actually going to feel when you're driving it is a whole different story. So why don't we go ahead, hop in the truck, we'll run through our test course and see how it feels. So here in the truck, go ahead and drop her into drive here and go for a spin. So try my best to hit our test course. We got some snow, and so they tried to plow the lot here and didn't do that great of a job, but that's okay, we'll make do. So, when I'm going over these bumps, I like to hit a few of them first, try to really get that weight and that energy kind of transferring through our chassis. And honestly, it's not terrible. It does feel soft. It definitely does feel a little bit softer though. I know I was just in a Ford last week and did the same thing, and it was a little bit stiffer. So, this, it just kind of feels a little bit sloppy over these bumps. Not terrible, but I can imagine, like we talked about earlier, if that weight was amplified, you definitely tell a difference. So I feel like there's some room for improvement here. Stiffen that chassis up a little bit, or stiffen our suspension up rather, and not make everything just work so hard. So now that we're done running through our bumps, we'll go ahead and do our next test here. Our next test, what this is going to consist of is some slalom, some evasive maneuvering, and this is usually where I tell a big difference. This is honestly more of a real world deal. You're not, you're going to make turns more than you are going to hit a series of bumps, but it's still a good test. So I'll come through this clearing and gain some speed, start getting a little more aggressive here. And yep, just about the same as every other vehicle. As soon as you get that weight in there, the truck just feels sloppy. you get a lot of body roll, so it's kind of feeling like it's top heavy, and it just doesn't feel that great. You can definitely improve that. And when I'm making these turns like this, it feels like the truck isn't as planted as it should be, and it takes a little more effort to get your wheel turn and get the truck, going where you want it to. So anxious to see if the airbags will help out with that. So now that we have our airbags on, put that same amount of weight here in the bed of the truck, and I took some measurements. So at first I had, it was about 25 pounds of air in the bags, something like that. And the truck was still an inch low from our factory ride height, which was 42 inches with no weight. And so what I did is I added, I think it was about another 10, 15 pounds of air. And doing that, I was able to bring the truck right back up to 42 inches, just like how it should be right out of the factory. And so here at the front, I actually didn't measure this one yet, but in theory, it should be what it was, right out of the box. That was 40.5 inches, so exactly, we are spot on. So essentially what's gonna happen, bringing the truck back to that factory ride height, we should get better performance, right? All the suspension geometry is where it should be. Our tires are making complete 100% contact with the ground. It's not changing our alignment, and so on. So, like I said before, the measurements kind of tell you one side of the story, but what really matters is, how we're gonna feel when we're driving our truck around. So, let's go ahead, hop back in, run through the course, and actually see if this made a difference or not. Back in our truck here, gonna do the same thing. We'll run through our bumps first, and I'm gonna try to do this the same way we did it last time. I'm gonna hit these first couple, really get that weight, transferring through our truck here, and it's better, actually. I'd say it's a little bit better. I mean, not a crazy drastic improvement, but it feels like, I don't know how I can explain this. It feels like the suspension isn't working so hard. Like there's a lot more travel, and it feels like it kind of gathers itself back together a little bit faster. So before, we'd hit a bump and you could feel it kind of float almost. Now we hit it, it goes one bump and kind of levels itself back out. So I think it's safe to say an improvement here. And I just keep telling myself too, with these trucks being so heavy duty, we don't have that much weight back there compared to what this thing can really handle. So I'm kind of looking at the big picture. If we had substantially more weight, I really think that's when these improvements would definitely be noticeable and kind of take it to the next level there. So once again, we will do some evasive maneuvering, and I'm curious to see the results of this, because I know in the past I've done a lot of suspension enhancements, and this is where they usually really shine. And even just a slight turn right there, already better, believe it or not. And yep, holds true with this one as well. These are definitely making an improvement. Essentially almost zero body roll, to be honest with you. And in turn, what that means is, it's explaining it's one thing, but actually driving around and feeling it, is a different ball game. The truck feels a lot more planted, not as sloppy, and is going where I want it to go with essentially zero effort. It feels like the truck's unloaded. So definitely a bonus there. And what that's going to end up meaning in the long run, not only is it better for your truck, you're not wearing it out, but as a driver, it gives you a little more confidence. I know, pulling a trailer and stuff like that, already you know, I won't say nerve-wracking, but it's something you got to drive a little bit differently, and you know, play it a little bit safer a lot of the times. And so anything you can have to help kind of instill a little bit more confidence in you, just as a driver even, is definitely worth it. So now that we, you know, we're done with our test course and everything, let's actually check these out underneath the truck. So this is what they're going to look like, and essentially they're going to take the place of your factory John's bumper, which is this part here. So this is there from the factory, essentially, excuse me, just to prevent your suspension from bottoming out. It really doesn't offer us any type of extra support or anything, but the airbag does. And how this is going to work is it's going to fill that gap from the bottom of your frame rail to the top of your axle housing. And so big cushion here. That way, whenever we put weight on our truck, you know, it's going to squat down, and the airbag is going to help support it. Probably the biggest benefit to an airbag is how much adjustability you're going to have. So these are adjustable in between 5 and 100 psi. Generally speaking, you know, you're probably not going to have to go above 40 or 50, but at least you can. So it's there if you need it. Usually that amount of pressure there is adequate to solve whatever issue you're trying to correct. Kind of the downside to an airbag, though, is the fact that you're going to have to maintenance it. All right, and so what I mean by that is these require a minimum of 5 psi in them all the time. You know, so if you're unloaded, you still have to keep pressuring them, because if not, the bag can fail, and it kind of becomes a safety issue, a safety thing too. You know, you don't want your bag failing on you, and then, you know, when you go to put a load on it, you're kind of stuck high and dry. So it's something you need to think about. And these are also, you know, you have airlines and stuff. Eventually, they're going to leak. There's really no other way around it. You know, you might get a few years out of it, but sooner or later, you're probably going to develop a leak. So that's something you have to think about as well. But one way to kind of help correct those issues is by using a compressor. And so a lot of times, a compressor will virtually eliminate your maintenance, because you can set them up in a way that it'll automatically kind of set the bags at that minimum pressure and then allow you to adjust them from there. So that's something to think about too. We have a ton of different compressors here at eTrailer. I really like the Airlift, the EZ compressor. Hands down the best, at least in my opinion, as terms of ease of use and things like that. And that kind of brings you to my next point. Airlift is also another popular brand of bag. I've done a lot of them, between Firestones, Airlifts, and honestly, I really don't have a preference. They're both pretty nice products, and what I've found in the past, it's really the only difference is going to be with the install most of the time. Yeah, I feel like if one bag is easy to install, the other one's kind of hard. And I think Firestone took the advantage here. This one goes on pretty easy, a lot easier than a lot of the other bags. So, you know, if that was something you're curious about, that's my 2 cents on it. And there's also, I mean, a ton of other suspension enhancements as well. I mean, there's dozens of them probably, but another one of the popular ones that I like is called a Timbrin, or even a Sumo spring. They both kind of are similar in their own right. But what those are going to do is essentially just replace your John's bumper, and that's really it. They're not so much adjustable, but they're maintenance free too. So when you bolt them in, you're done. So if you know, if you're kind of someone who tows every now and again, maybe just on the weekend, maybe just a trailer, that might be an option for you, because they're a little less of a hassle, you know, to kind of keep maintained. But an airbag, you're definitely going to have more adjustability, and you know, if you're towing a lot of different things with it, probably definitely the way to go. I have noticed, so with the airbags, when you're not towing, you can expect your truck to be a little bit stiffer. Some people may disagree with that, but that's at least my opinion, because I've noticed, you you know, just driving around the parking lots and stuff, when the truck's unloaded and even at the minimum pressure, the truck feels a little bit firmer. But, you know, that's just one of the things. It's kind of one of those trade-offs. You know, you can have that extra support when you really need it, and you might just have to deal with a little bit more of a stiff ride whenever you're not towing. I do want to address one of the big questions that we get asked quite a bit when people are putting airbags on, is if they're going to interfere with your gooseneck or your fifth wheel. And I can't speak for every single one of them, obviously, but by the looks of it, they shouldn't really interfere. They don't really block the frame or anything. And today's a pretty good example that we actually have a B&W gooseneck hitch installed on our pickup, so I can 100% assure you it'll work with this setup. But like I said, the majority of them are going to be bolt up similar, and the bags just don't really block the frame rail, where generally speaking most fifth wheels and goosenecks would bolt up to. So I think it's pretty safe to say if you got a gooseneck or a fifth wheel, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape. These are going to have a 5,000 pound load carrying capacity, so keep in mind that's not going to add to your truck's weight carrying capacity. That's just how much weight these can handle. But other than that, if you're looking for airbags, pretty nice choice. You know, a nice kit. Everything's well built. It went together pretty easy, so not too bad there. That kind of brings you to my next point. As far as getting these installed, pretty straightforward and really shouldn't give you too many issues. There's one point where I kind of had a little trouble getting a bracket on back here. Figured it out though. It actually is a pretty easy solution, so I'll show you how to do that. Hopefully that'll speed things up a little bit for you. But yeah, why don't we go ahead and get started and get these on together now. To begin our installation, we're going to be underneath the bottom of our truck here, and I definitely suggest removing the spare tire for now. Gives you a lot more room to work, and there's a heat shield here that you don't have to take off, but makes a lot easier if you do. There's two 13mm bolts you pull out and that drops down. But with that said, first thing we need to do is remove our factory jounce bumper, which is this piece here. You can spray it down with some soapy water, penetrating oil, whatever you got. And then you can take either a pry bar or a big screwdriver even, and work in underneath it and pop it out. Now we can move over to the bench and start to assemble some of our brackets and things like that. So we're going to have these two pieces. We're going to take these hex bolts, put that through, flange nut, and just get like a thread or two started on it. Same deal with this one. And then we can take this bracket, and you want to lay it like this. You're going to set this on top of these holes, right? Then you're going to take these Allen head bolts, and from the bottom side, put that in, set that over it, and take your flange nut. And again, we're just going to leave these hand tight for now. I'm going to do the same thing for our remaining attachment points there. Now we can grab our air spring, and if you flip it over to the bottom, there's going to be a threaded hole there. You could take the bracket, and you want the side that has the beveled edge to set like that. We're going to take this bolt. It's got an Allen key head in it. And we're just going to get this started hand tight as well. So back underneath the vehicle, it's going to be kind of tricky. I'll do my best to explain it, but what you're going to do is hold this flat against this cup. All right, and you can see this piece that we put on, that's going to kind of go around the outside of that cup, and when we're pushing up flat on this, we're going to tighten this down until it kind of, you know, grabs onto it. I'm going to use an 11mm for that nut there, and then a 3/8 wrench to hold this one. This part of the bracket's going to be on the inside of the frame. So we'll just slip that around it. And I'll try to tighten these down. You want to make sure to tighten them evenly or as best as you can. That way it kind of draws everything in, you know. And I was thinking too, if you're having a hard time doing this, you might be able to take a measurement and jam a piece of wood in there, or maybe like a bottle jack or something. But I'll make do here. Like I said, you want to make sure this is even. I noticed on the side closest to you, the bolt was out a little bit more. Tightening up that side first. You may get lucky. This one I'm actually tightening and it's not, the other side of the bolt isn't spinning, so. We'll just run this down until it's staying in place. So once those bolts are tight, we can come to these flange head bolts on the bottom. And again, you want to tighten these down evenly, so kind of do like an X pattern type deal. We're using a 7/32 Allen key and then a 9/16 wrench. We'll snug these down. So once all those are snug, you need to make sure to come back with a torque wrench and tighten down the hardware to the amount specified in the instructions. If you don't have a torque wrench, you can grab one at etrailer here or go to your local auto parts store. They'll have one there available to rent. Now we can grab our airbag assembly, and if you look on the top of the bag, we're gonna have this threaded rod and then a dowel. All right, so just a piece of metal that sticks up. If you look on our upper bracket, there's gonna be 3 holes. You wanna make sure that that dowel is going to line up or be in that center hole. All right, and then this hole here, that's where the threaded rod is going to go up through. So with that said, take our airbag and set that in. And what I do is usually turn the bag so it's not, the dowel's not even in any of the holes, and then rotate it so you can feel it click in. So that's the first hole. Rotate it a little bit more. So there's the middle one. All right. So what we're going to do is make sure that this plate and everything is sitting flat how we want it. All right. Make sure that dowel's in there. We want this plate to be, you know, as flat on this bottom part, or this part of our the axle housing there. And then we're going to take a marker and put a couple index lines. So do one of these type of deals. And we're doing this because that bolt on the bottom there that we put on, if you remember, we left it hand tight. We're going to have to pull this out and tighten that bolt down. But we want everything to be lined up still. So I'm just gonna kind of trace a little bit here. You really can't, you know, go overkill here, but I like to do at least a couple marks. That way we have a good reference point. So once I have my marks made, what we'll do is simply just pull this back out and go back over to the workbench and get it tightened down. So over here on the bench, we can make sure all of our marks are lined up. We're going to take our Allen key, snug that up. We'll come back with our torque wrench and make sure it's torqued down properly. We'll take our assembly here, slide that in. If you're doing the passenger side, don't forget to put on your heat shield at this point, and you'll see what I'm talking about later on. Make sure everything sits in there the way it should. And then you're going to take these brackets, and these are going to kind of slide and grip this bracket here in that opening. You're going to drop down one of these carriage bolts. And we'll take a flange nut. Get that started. Then you're just going to do the same thing on the front side of our air spring. You want to leave these just hand tight for now. In most cases, we're going to have this piece welded onto our axle housing. Our brackets here that grab this probably ain't going to fit in there. So what I'm going to try to do is just take a hammer and tap it in. It actually went together better than I thought, so that's good. But just wanted to point that out, and that way you don't get hung up on it. We'll take the carriage bolt and the flange nut and get it hand tight. And at the top, where the threaded portion of our airbag is through the upper bracket, you're going to take one of these star washers, put that on, and then the big nut. Get this started as well. So first thing we're going to tighten is this nut. It's 1 1/8 in size, so you can just take a box wrench. A lot of you probably aren't going to have one this big. You can also always use an adjustable crescent wrench. And go ahead and tighten it completely down. And then we can move on to our carriage bolts. So the one back here, the one up front. Take a 9/16 and snug these down. Again, alternate from side to side. And once I have everything snug, I'll come back with my torque wrench and torque everything down. At this point, once the hardware is torqued, you're going to take your air fitting, the brass air fitting, and this is going to thread to the top of our airbag there. So we'll get it started by hand. And then we'll come back with a 9/16 and tighten this down. When you're tightening this down, I mean, you don't need to get crazy here. What you're gonna do is, I just all feel honestly, so tighten it down. And once you feel it start to get relatively tight, give it like another, I don't know, half a turn maybe. And we'll call that good. With that being brass, you don't want to over tighten it, it can crack. Worst case scenario, if it leaks, we just come back and put another turn or two on it. So better to have it a little loose than over tighten and break it. So once you're done with the airbag over there on the driver's side, you're going to repeat those same steps over here on the passenger side. One difference being that heat shield that I kind of hinted on earlier. So before you tighten the top of the bag down to your upper bracket, this plate, this heat shield plate's just going to get sandwiched in between there. So that's really all there is to it. You know, you want to have a decent amount of distance in between the back of the heat shield and the bag. And also, you know, I'd say at least a good hand's width from the exhaust pipe there. That way it doesn't shift and rattle on you or anything. So with both of our airbags installed, we can start to route and run our airlines. So I've already got the passenger side done. We'll go ahead and work through the driver's side together. But you're gonna mount up your bracket here. So this literally just zip ties to your hitch, right? Pretty straightforward. What you're gonna do is take your air fitting into flat washer and put that through, and then on the other side of it, we'll have some other hardware we're gonna put on to keep it secure. Where it comes out, our bracket, you're gonna take a flat washer, and then your brass nut there, and if I can get it started, there we go. We'll run this down, and then you can take a couple of 1/2-inch wrenches, 13 millimeters will work too, and we're just gonna snug this down a little bit. After this, we can actually route our airline, and I like to put this on first because that way we know where we actually need to route our airlines to. So put this in place, that's what we can focus on next. So before you start to route any of the airline, what you can do is take the big bundle of it, stretch it out, find the middle, and cut it in half. So this is just 1/2 here. And then we can focus on the ends. So when we do the end, any cuts that we make that we're gonna plug into any of the fittings, we want the cuts to be really clean and straight. So you wanna use a tool like this, or even just the razor edge. You can kind of set this down on a bench, cut it. They make tubing cutting tools. You just wanna avoid using a regular pair of snips because then it'll kind of jam it and potentially create a leak. So when you cut that, you want it to look like this. So really straight, no burrs on it or anything like that. So anything that we plug an airline into, fitting wise, that's what type of cuts we're gonna make. So I got our tubing ran. To plug these in, they're all quick connect fittings, so you cut it clean. And essentially they just kind of plug right into place. Over here on the driver's side, I kind of just bundled up some extra wiring or extra tubing, ran that on top of this bracket, kind of see where the tubing comes out. And I followed some factory wiring. And when you're doing this, do your best to avoid any hotter moving parts. Use zip ties along the way to secure it. Drops down right through there and plugs into the top of our bag. For the passenger side one, same deal. Just ran this up along through here where it drops down and plugs into the bag. Before you plug it into the bag though, they give you a couple heat sleeves, heat shield deals. So you can slide that onto the airline tubing first and then plug it in, and that just is gonna help keep it protected from the exhaust air. So once everything's hooked up, we need to inflate the bags. We're gonna put 70 pounds air in them. That way we can check everything for leaks. So once you have the proper amount of air in the bags, you wanna come back with some soapy water, spray it on all your connection points. And a couple ways we can check for leaks. One of them is, listen for them. And nice and quiet. If you hear air leaking, obviously, it's a pretty good indicator. Another way though, when you spray it down with soapy water, give it a minute, and what you're looking for is for bubbles to rapidly form. So here we look pretty good. We got a couple small bubbles, but that's just from spraying it on there. If you see them continuously develop, you know we have a leak. So we'll do this on all our fittings, make sure we're good. If you do have a leak, not really a big deal. Let the air out of the bags, take your line back out, recut the line clean, plug it back in, and repeat that same process until you eliminate all of your leaks. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs for the rear axle on our 2022 Chevrolet Silverado 2500.